Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. Today's topic is the strategy of just run away. Joining me in this discussion is Matt Stait. Before we start, please consider supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Spirit Aikido online program, which currently contains more than 180 videos. Another option is to contribute any amount you like through the PayPal tip jar. Even small contributions are greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. One minor note before we get started. That is that Matt seems to have a little bit of internet connection trouble periodically through the show. These pauses last only for about 7 or 8 seconds, so please be patient. All right, I want to welcome Matt Stait back to the podcast. I always love chatting with him. And today the topic we're going to cover is the strategy of just run away or just walk away from violence. And so welcome back, Matt, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Nice to chat with you again. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. One of the common things we hear almost as a cliche from martial art instructors is just walk away or just run away from violence. And I want to cover both of these because running away is a little different than walking away, but the basic principle is the same. And like many cliches, it's a cliche for a reason. And I think there is a certain amount of validity to it. If you get into violence because of pride or your ego, or you let your anger become out of control, that is when the advice of walk away is certainly valid. If your mouth or your attitude are getting you into trouble and causing a problem, then yes, that's where walking away, I think, is certainly something to keep in mind. And this may be whether you have temper control issues, maybe a drinking problem, any types of sort of issues that are your own. Remembering to just walk away or just get out of there is certainly a good thing. In fact, one of the approaches that I've found very useful when things, and you can tell when things in a room, whether they're involved with you or with somebody else, start to get tense, like sticky, problems are starting to go down. And you start to notice, immediately think, do I really need to be in this room right now? Like, is it absolutely necessary that I be here? And if the answer is no, then certainly this is where making an exit is a good thing to do. Although there are a lot of times when that answer won't be no. If I leave, somebody I care about could be victimized, or there could be damage. It could be your own house. Why would you run away if you're in your own house and somebody's causing a violent problem you have to deal with? So these are a few of the ways that I like to categorize. Okay, do I need to get involved with this? Is this something that I can avoid? If the answer is yes, I can avoid it, then definitely do. But if the answer is no, I could get out of here, but could the person with me or the people with me get out of here? Would they get caught up in a violent situation? Then the answer might be yes, I do have to be here. I should be here. Maybe I'm the one who's trained the best out of the people that are on hand in order to take a violent situation and neutralize it. And there's a lot of variables there, usually with where am I, who's around, am I outnumbered, is there security around or people that can help me, and there's so many variables we couldn't even talk about all of them in this show. But and it's somebody like yourself who's been a bouncer. I'm sure a lot of that is, it's my job to make sure that violence doesn't happen here. So you have to step in. But I think each civilian may have that with their own family. Like, I'm the one who's got to protect them right now because I'm the only one here. So what are your thoughts on seeing things go on around you that you start to feel like, oh, this could go badly? Maybe I can intercept it, or maybe I can do something to, take the temperature down and not just run.
Well, there was an awful lot in what you've just said there, and lots of different elements to that. You did freeze a little bit once or twice there, so there were some little bits that I missed. But
sure,
yeah, it's the oversimplification of the message, isn't it? Just run away. You can't simplify it down to that thing. Nobody, yourself included, nobody's saying that if that's a viable option, we shouldn't take it, because we should. The question is it always a viable option? And is that viable option in the moment going to make it better or worse, so on and so forth? And, you know, are we causing the problem? There are so many elements towards it.
Mhm.
I was given a story a number of years ago in and around this, and it sort of summed it up for me, really. And basically, the story was about these two guys. They were out in the desert. They'd been they'd been off exploring and doing their thing, and traipsing around the world and having a high old time. And they were held up by bandits in the desert. And they had roughly around 3 days water and around 3 days food. So basically enough for 3 days travel. But they were at least 5 days from civilization. And the question was basically, do they stand and fight, or do they suffer a slow death? Because they could just hand everything over and say, hey, it's just stuff, you know, live to fight another day and all that kind of thing. But the truth of the matter, almost certainly in that particular instance, was that if they'd handed everything. So it's just one of those interesting little stories that really sort of throws that up and highlights the different sort of nuances to it. So I mean, quite often with the whole running away kind of scenario, I think there can be times when that actually makes the situation a whole lot worse. And it's just knowing these things, isn't it? But one of the things you pointed out there was sensing trouble in the first instance. Now, again, what I tend to find is people that have worked in those kind of environments where they had to deal with that kind of violence on any kind of level, then you sort of gather, you get this awareness where you can feel it in the air, you can feel it happening. And so, you know, again, it's choosing the moment, isn't it? Running away or moving away or evading or anything like that is actually a great thing to do at that point. It makes perfect sense to, you know, rather than get embroiled in something that you don't have to get embroiled in.
Mhm.
Exactly, time to sort of move on and do something else if you can. It's whether or not you can, isn't it? That therein lies the question. It's breaking down whether or not you can and whether or not it's going to make it worse or better.
And I think the critics, the people that embrace the just run away or the just walk away will often try to paint this in a black and white sort of, or a binary solution, where if you're not running away, now you're just turning into some kind of a combat monster and just going to start beating people up as the solution. And I think there's a lot more nuance to exactly how you approach intervening in a violent situation than just flipping on the aggression switch and starting to go crazy.
Yeah, well, just very quickly on that, because usually you get, and again, this isn't to criticize anyone specifically, but
Right.
quite often what you get is never let anyone get close enough to me. You know, it's that fantasist behavior, if you like, because the reality of it is that the world is an unpleasant, ugly place with ugly people in it. And, you know, bad things happen to good people all of the time. And so it's trying to basically assess the situation as best as you can, isn't it? I mean, you've worked in an environment and been in an environment where, you know, where you've seen violence at the coalface in the raw, and it's never like it is on the TV. You know, it's just not.
No, it is. And, you know, you get to learn to spot the little cues that things are starting to ramp up. I remember a fellow instructor told me a great story of kind of how this really goes, because so many martial artists will often characterize when they might need to use their martial art as, one is the bar fight, the other one is the total ambush, like they're at an ATM and a guy robber jumps out from behind the bushes and says, give me your money. You know, they characterize these in such simple ways, but this one was rather profound. And that is, my friend told me that when he was younger, his ex-girlfriend was getting married, and they still remain friends even after they broke up, very close friends, as a matter of fact. And she said, I really want you to come to my wedding. I really want you to be there. And he thought to himself, well, her dad never really liked me, her brother never really liked me, I probably shouldn't go, but I don't want to say, no, I'm not going to your wedding. So out of obligation, he went. And he went to the reception and he said, it's probably against my better judgment, but again, I wanted to put in an appearance. And meanwhile, the father started getting drunk, the brother started getting drunk, he started getting that that, uh-oh, things are starting to kind of heat up. And he's like, at that point, I should have realized, gone over to my friend and said, this is a lovely wedding. Thank you for having me here. It's very special that I could be here, and just left. But he said, I didn't do that. I wound up staying where a little longer than I should have. They wound up getting into a dust up with the father and the brother, and the bride actually had to step in between them to stop to try to cool everything off, which she did, and it worked. But it's one of those things where this violence that can come up can come in subtle ways that you think, well, yeah, this could be uncomfortable, but I have an obligation, or I should be there. It's not just the fight in the bar. It's not just the robber at the ATM or a carjacker or something like that. You know, and it doesn't even involve having to use martial arts, just using good judgment about when can I leave? When should I leave? Should I show up in the first place? And I'd say he got it about 80% right, you know, and even learning the lesson of, well, I could have exited a little sooner. I didn't need to stay as long as I did, as I saw this situation start to roll into getting into a not so good place. That's kind of how nuanced violence can really be, and how a peaceful person does not ever expect to get into a fist fight going to a wedding, you know, but that's how violence can surprise you sometimes, you know, where you didn't expect it.
Well, again, anywhere that involves alcohol and emotion, it's a potent mixture, and that
Very much so.
a wedding is full of both of those things. You know, very emotional, and a lot of all families are the same, aren't they? You know, when people say my family is weird, everybody says my family is weird. You know, because most families are weird, truth be told. And there's always undercurrents, there's always history, there's always things bubbling away under the surface. You know. And all of those things come into play with everything that you know, everywhere you go and everything that you do. I mean, that's essentially where a decent risk assessment comes in as a matter of course. I mean, you know, that's something that I think people should be doing all day, every day. Well, we do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially in situations as you just said there, because there's an identified element of risk, and there's an identified, if you like, scale of risk, as in 2 in the afternoon in the church, not so bad. 10 p.m. after several drinks and the disco, much more likely. So again, it's knowing that. And so when it came to work, I was always told that all the good people left by midnight. Now, again, that is an oversimplification, but you tended to see that a lot. You'd have that sort of swing over time where people would be out having a nice time, whatever it was they were doing, whether it was, you know, a concert or a nightclub or a bar or a restaurant, doesn't matter. But then there'd be that sort of tipping point as the night got a bit later, and then, you know, people would start to, how should we say, enjoy themselves a little, perhaps too much, and that's where we used to find that a lot of people would go home at that point. They'd say, "Thank you very much, been a pleasant evening. You know, I've had a great time. Now it's time for me to go." And it was from that point on where it started to get colourful.
Right.
And so
having been there for some of those wild times, it that is exactly like that. And just like you said, although most sensible people leave by about midnight, others, you know, will stay out a bit later, and they'll often think they're in a safe place. They'll look around and they'll see security there, and you know, they'll think, well, you know, I'm here enjoying a couple of beers and listening to music, and I'm gonna, you know, go home safely and whatnot, and can suddenly be in a very sticky situation where running away may just be physically limited because of the confined space. They're cornered, or they are just, there's nowhere to go. And I've seen this both personally and heard many accounts of, I just wanted to get out of there, but there was nowhere for me to get out. There was no way for me to get past this aggressive person. It was just not an option. And so the physical part is one of them. And actually I had a story from many years ago here in the Twin Cities. We have a large amusement park. And this was a story of a man who, he and his wife brought his daughters to this amusement park for an afternoon. They were out there riding rides and, you know, having a good time. And they went to exit the park, and the park exit had, you know, the one-way gates, so you can go out, but you can't come back in. And there were some, you know, kind of ne'er-do-wells hanging around there, and they started catcalling at these teenage girls, and you know, the family felt very uncomfortable, so they did exactly that. They ran away. They tried to get to their car as quickly as possible, and these young men followed them to their car way out in the middle of this huge parking lot, and proceeded to beat this guy so bad that he was in a coma for a week, and he barely got out of it. Now, I mean, I don't want to second guess the situation or his choices in that situation, because you can't just get back into the park. Apparently, they did not have any security personnel just outside the exit gates. So once you go through those gates, you are in essentially a big empty parking lot. But the idea that, you know, just get to the car and get away, if they can pursue you, if somebody is actually a predator or a group of people are predators, they could follow you, and it doesn't mean you're going to get into your car and into a safe place. Or, you know, nowadays people are smashing car windows and you know, going even crazier. I don't know if he would have been any safer trying to confront these guys right at the gates. Although, you know, there are theoretically cameras, or at least somebody might see them there, as opposed to being deep into a huge parking lot where chances are they would not be seen. So it kind of is one of those situations where you can suddenly, unexpectedly, coming out of an afternoon at an amusement park, be in a tremendously violent situation where you don't have access to get back to safety. And my guess is he probably got caught by surprise. Had, you know, there were very few options. I don't know, how would you run with, you know, your wife and your teenage daughters with essentially a gang pursuing you? You know, like I said, there's so many variables when it comes to how do you navigate and stay safe. And, you know, in that instance, you could maybe point the finger at the park, although it doesn't save you from the hospital trip you had to take, by saying, why didn't you have security personnel, you know, by the exit gates or anything like that. But it just stood to me as a stark reminder that no matter how safe you think you are, you may not be. And you can very quickly, in a place that you view as very civilized and peaceful, encounter a very unpeaceful circumstance, and have to think very quickly. So my heart goes out to him and his family. This was a story that I think I heard about 8 or 9 years ago. It's been a while back, but I'm, you know, it's one of those reminders of, you know, just because you think you are navigating a peaceful part of town, it might not be. And you can, and this was in the afternoon. This was not at night or anything. This was, I think, at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and the sun sets in the summer here at about 9 o'clock. So, you know, pretty much broad daylight.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because the trouble is, there are times when standing your ground is the right thing to do. There are times when trying to get out of there is the right thing to do. And as you said about second guessing, I mean, we can't really do that. And so essentially it's one of those situations where the person in the moment is the person that has to make the choice. I suppose the best thing to do really would be to try to talk around some of the thought processes towards making the
right
choice, to have a look at some of the situations. Some you've already pointed out at the beginning. So, you know, do you actually know where you're running to? Is it actually better or worse than where you already are?
right
You know, fundamental things like that. You know, are you, as you say, leaving people behind? You know, if I'm pushing my 2-year-old daughter in a buggy, I'm not just going to abandon them and run off, or at least I wouldn't like to think I would. And so there are all these things to bring into play. You know, what am I wearing? Well, because that has a bearing. That has a huge bearing, more so than a lot of people sort of realize. You know, if I'm wearing a pair of dress shoes, almost certainly I'm going to slip over if I try and run. Almost certainly. And it's things like that that make a big difference that I think sometimes are overlooked. You know, if I'm in a pair of trainers, if I'm warmed up, and if I've, you know, got my head in the right space to go for a run, I can run, as can a lot of people, you know. And we look at that, and this is very similar to martial arts and self-defense. We look at that run under those conditions, and we think that that's what it's going to be like. when we're actually under duress and, you know, and genuine fear, and bad things are going to happen. And the truth is, normally in that instance, we're not in the best attire. We haven't got our running gear on. We haven't had a stretch. You know, we're not necessarily on a flat surface on a lovely afternoon. And all of those things need to sort of come into the equation. So what are we wearing? Where are we? Are we going to be better or worse? You know, who are the people chasing us, for want of a better word? Because again, in the nicest possible way, I'm not a young man anymore, and I'll be all right for a sprint, but you know, if the guy's 20 and fit, he's going to outrun me.
Right. Well, and that's a common thing of where people kind of just do a very simple math equation to say, well, yeah, I can run away, and maybe they're fit enough to outrun. Maybe say I can run a quarter mile and I can outrun somebody. But there are a few things that happen when somebody's pursuing you that make it different than you just doing a cross country run to try to either outrun somebody's physicality or outrun their interest. Like they don't want to rob you enough to bother wanting to run for 3 blocks, you know, and hopefully they'll get bored and say, it's too much work and I'll go on to the next person. But, and this is something I learned from one of my law enforcement friends. They said, when you're chasing somebody, the mindset of the person being pursued is entirely different than the mindset of the pursuer. And that is, when you're running from something you're terrified from, you're going to start adrenaline dumping. You're going to start gasping for air, and you're going to get exhausted much faster than if you just got on your tennis shoes, warmed up a little bit, and you went jogging around the park. And the old saying goes, the rabbit runs for his life, but the wolf is only running for his dinner. When you're running in panic, you cannot run the same way that you can. You might feel like you're running faster, but you're going to tire out and exhaust very, very quickly. And your own cardio, you know, maybe a factor. If you're chased by somebody who's younger, you might run out of gas even normally. But if they're just chasing you to get money off you, they can just kind of lope along and they'll still catch you. And this is another thing I learned from pursuits, from those who do it professionally. And they'll say, you know, because my law enforcement friend is like, I'm carrying 30 pounds worth of gear on my belt. I got boots on. I'm wearing basically a polyester outfit, and I can outrun some kid in a hoodie and shorts and tennis shoes. Not because I'm faster, but because he's panicked. He's scrambling around to find an escape. All I got to do is basically stay within eye shot of him. And sooner or later, he's going to trip. He's going to catch himself up on some obstacle. He's going to slip and fall or something, and I'll catch him. And he says, I've never had anybody outrun me. And he's like, I'm not the fastest guy on foot either. You know, you don't need to be a speed demon to catch up with somebody who, you know, gets caught trying to climb over a fence or something like that. And so really the reverse is true. If we think that running away is going to be our strategy, really parkour is the martial art for you, because you need to train to be able to run, to be able to cross over obstacles that other people can't cross and do it quickly. It's a very athletic art. And I tried it for a little while and I realized, boy, this is for young people, because you will bash up your shins, your hands. I mean, it's a hard art to study, and concrete and steel rails are not forgiving. Of course, a lot of martial arts are really oriented for young people and the impact that their bodies will take and the pounding they will take. And I really admire parkour for the athletics. I mean, you're talking about high level gymnastics to be able to do what they can do. And I'm not talking about running and climbing up to a 2nd-story balcony in a couple of leaps, although that's really impressive. But even just clearing railings and hopping multiple steps and stuff, if you miss one of those and you twist your ankle or you twist your knee, now you got to deal with an attacker. Where does that put you? To me, I think that puts you very much behind the 8 ball. You may be huffing and puffing for air. You're now exhausted, maybe injured, and now you have to deal with an attacker. In my mind, I'd rather deal it when I've got 100% of my energy and my limbs all working anyway. And I've heard from other instructors and people that are a little older. I mean, my knees are pretty good. They've got bad knees. I'm not going to run for 20 feet. It's like, I got to deal with what I have right now because my knees are bad or my back is bad. And I think these things enter into the picture too of, and Sun Tzu would, his old saying of know yourself and know your enemy. And in 100 battles, you'll never be in peril. If you know that you don't want to deal with a violent engagement, exhausted and injured, and you'd rather do it in this spot, regardless of whether maybe you have to move a little bit to be in a more advantaged location. You don't want to be behind a dumpster in an alley. You'd rather be out where there people could see you and might come to your aid, but that's not going to be sprinting to get there. It's going to be, a placement kind of a thing. But yeah, an attacker might lose interest in you and might not chase you, but what if he does? And I guess that's a big question.
Yeah, absolutely. These are all things that sort of come into that consideration, isn't it? Before you sort of take an action, that's the difference really, isn't it? It's if you're gonna run away, then it's a choice and it's a decision that you've rationally reached, as opposed to a panic response where you're just literally flying blind and haven't thought through all of the possible, the ramifications and the possibilities of what could happen with that. So, I mean, it's an interesting one because the simplification of it doesn't sort of acknowledge all the different elements of it. As an example, we talked a little bit about, if you like, the preemptive, as in, I can feel something's, bubbling away there. Let's just leave the situation before it explodes, which is great. We've talked about an actual physical attack, shall we say, or a physical altercation in the moment. But then there's the other side of that as well. And you see this a lot within security work and other things like that. That sort of deferred problem where you capitulate just to try and stop it from happening, but it actually happens further down the line. So, you'll move away and let them have what they want and just turn the other cheek over and over again. But all you're doing is storing it up for later on. You see it in security a lot. Great big bloke comes up to the door. He's very aggressive, showing a lot of bad attitude. And I've seen it before where the door supervisor, the security there, will actually say, oh, okay, I'll let you have what you want. I'll let you in, whatever it is, just to avoid confrontation, which, although isn't physically running away, is mentally running away. But then all that does is it just opens up the doorway for that person to think you're weak, you're ineffective, you're a pushover, you're easy to manipulate and abuse, and they will just carry on, but worse. And so there's that mental running away as well, which needs to be part of the conversation, I think.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. It reminds me, I think just yesterday I saw an article. It was about a girl, I think she was about 8 years old, and she was being bullied by a schoolmate. And this was a consistent behavior, and she didn't engage with it, basically tried to move on. And like you said, it deferred it. And that she had photos, this bully eventually attacked her and was slamming her head into the ground, in the pavement. She lost a tooth, blood on her face, the whole thing. We often think of violence as being by a stranger, by somebody we don't know. It's a one-time thing, kind of like at the amusement park. But according to crime statistics, at least here in the United States, 80% of violent crime is done by somebody the victim has met before or knows before. And you bring up a great point, which is it's not just the bar fight scenario or the ATM scenario. It might be somebody who's started with a low level of aggression towards you and is testing you to see if you are going to be easy pickings, and they will work their courage up, perhaps over successive encounters with you, and get brave because you're just going to turn and walk away, and that emboldens them. Of course, now we branch into kind of bullying behavior, and there are ways to, without just beating up somebody who you view as a bully, of giving them notice of you're not going to put up with them being verbally aggressive or physically aggressive with you. And that's kind of an art all of it itself, but it's a way to preemptively stop the escalation, their escalation, from wanting to poke you a little bit to wanting to mess with you to wanting to actually attack you. And I do agree. I think that preemptively stopping that escalation before it gets to be that before your bully or your aggressor has worked themselves up the courage to know that you're not going to hit them back. They're just going to have a free rein on you. And eventually you will have that physical problem. You know, and I feel for children. I've actually interviewed hundreds of victims of bullying, mostly focused on childhood bullying. And I feel for children because an adult has a great deal of control over where they go in their life. If they're getting bullied at a job, they can quit that job. They can go to another job. They can choose where they go to dinner. They can choose where they go shopping. But a child really is stuck. They have to go where they are told to go, and they don't have any choices or autonomy yet. But as an adult, we can choose those to some degree, but there are cases of adult bullying, of, you know, coworkers, neighbors. You know, what, you can try to sell your house and move away, but even that doesn't happen very quickly. So you might be encountering somebody again and again. It might be a relative, might be, you know, a friend of a friend. These things can happen in many different realms. But you're absolutely right. I think that you know, we can't just characterize violence as being this is a stranger that does it. It could be somebody you know.
Yeah, well, this is where it's sort of it's so much wider than the very simplistic just run away, because the truth is there are predators in the world, right? And
Yes.
the easiest way I can explain this is that I have a dog, right? He's a fantastic dog. He's a beautiful dog, but he is a dog and he will act like a dog, which means he has a prey drive, which means he will react to movement and fast movement. So if you run, that will set off his prey drive and he will be a dog. Now, you can't blame a dog for being a dog, right? But my point is that there are predatory people in this world. And if you run, sometimes it's the right thing to do. Other times it's just going to make the situation worse. And those predatory people, sometimes the best thing you can do is actually just stand there and say, that's it, that's enough. I'm not standing for that. I'm not having that. And I don't just mean in a physical sense. I mean, you know, emotionally, right across the gambit. You know, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because it's, as I said at the beginning, you can't tell people what they need to do in any given moment, because, well, you can't. Every moment's different. But it's having that sort of understanding of the situation and what sort of where the triggers are and what kind of people you're dealing with. So again, I suppose we're almost moving off topic in one sense, but in the other sense, we're not, because what we're doing is we're trying to identify when is the right time to leave the scene, when is the right time to run, when is the right time to confront, when is the right time to call that person out on their behavior. You know, and so it's, you know, spotting those types of people and those types of behaviors. Yeah, helps to make where somebody has decided to take the path of being non-confrontational and has actually made the situation far worse over time by doing it.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, you know, I love watching kids play, because they'll do that exactly like what you talked about with the dog. If you want to get chased, you just take off running, and usually another kid will just chase right after you. It's so ingrained in our predatory behavior of, you know, and when kids, they like the excitement of the chase. To them, it's playing, but the behavior is still there. If you do run, you are inviting chase. And I think that there's, even without the running part, if I'm a predator and I approach you and I make it pretty clear by my body language that I am going to impose my will on you, and I see you get nervous and start to back away and start to even walk away like you're retreating, I'm going to pursue you. And that can be very, very slow. It doesn't have to be that you take off running like a jackrabbit, but I know by the body language that you've shown that you are submitting, that you do not want to confront me. You don't want to, and this is the other thing that you described really well. And I like putting the term setting a boundary. When you say, I'm not going to put up with this, or no, this is not going to happen, you are establishing a boundary rather than just retreating. And the one thing about a boundary, when a boundary is created, you have to be able to enforce it. You have to have the will to enforce it and the ability to enforce it. Because what can happen is you draw that line and say, I don't want you in my space. And then the predator steps over the line and says, well, what are you going to do about it? That tends to be the next thing. And that's where our physical training comes in to say, I'm going to enforce my boundary with you. And I think this also crosses into things like violence that happens. Maybe violence is not the right word, but the boundary crossing that happens on date situations where, wandering hands or things that make people feel uncomfortable in terms of, a date situation can be, was there a boundary established? If not, then how does the person know they've crossed a boundary? If you never enforce a boundary, then you're kind of giving license to the aggressor that what they're doing is okay. And for any behavior, what you allow or what you accept is what you endorse. So if somebody's being just a verbal jerk, like they're being abusive, and you don't say, hey, I want you to stop that. I'm not going to accept you cursing at me or calling me names or what have you. If you just sit there silently, they'll just think, oh, okay, well, they're cool with this. I'll just keep going. So I think that those boundaries are important, as long as you're ready to enforce them. Because the minute you don't enforce a boundary, for example, don't put your arm around me, keep your hands off me, and then when they keep doing it, you don't do anything to respond, then the boundary is useless. There's no point. You've now said,
yeah. As I say, we're very, very much back in the realms of what I was saying at the beginning there with regards to assessing the situation and working out the, if you like, the value ladder and whether or not your actions are going to make something better or worse. So, so in the way that you were describing that, then we want to be able to set boundaries, but we don't want to be the person that is just this really difficult person to get along with, that is just demanding things all the time. And I mean, that's where it becomes interesting then, because this goes back to those risk assessments, those value things, and figuring out, is it worth it is that picking your battles, isn't it? But that does, when somebody says pick your battles, I mean, that does state quite categorically that there are times to run, but there are times to stand your ground. And it's trying to figure out which of those things, or a version of, is the right thing to do. And again, we're right back to saying that none of us can second guess anybody's situation. There was the famous MMA guy the other day, wasn't there, that unfortunately some people have been quite unpleasant about on social media, I've noticed. I don't really know the story fully, other than that he's a professional MMA guy and a jiu-jitsu coach and what have you, and got into an altercation with a couple of guys and got himself badly hurt. And he obviously decided to fight for whatever reason. I mean, I don't know why, I don't know the story, but he got seriously hurt. And we're all human, we're all susceptible to that. And there's not a man alive that isn't, that can't be beaten. It's just not. It's as simple as that, especially when you're talking numbers, weapons, and everything else. And so for the few people that were there, that appeared on social media saying things like, oh, well, see, MMA isn't all that and all the rest of it, it was like, in the nicest possible way, a bit frustrated by that, because again, there, but for the grace of God, it could happen to any one of us. Would he have been better off running in that situation? The truth is, I don't actually know, because I don't know the story and I wasn't there, But my guess is, as a professional athlete, as a martial artist of many years, my guess is that he wouldn't necessarily have charged into that willingly. But then I don't know. See, I mean, that's
sure. Yeah, I saw the same news story, and I just glanced at the footage. I didn't make a full study of it, but as I understand it, he saw somebody getting beaten up and he charged in to help, didn't realize that the crowd was not sympathetic, and the crowd turned on him and suddenly he was in the midst of a bunch of people coming at him from every direction. So I guess, and I totally agree with you. I don't know the setup situation. I'll give him props for going in to try to save somebody from being beaten up. That's a very noble thing. You know, but I totally agree with you. Like, nobody is impervious. I don't care how much training you have. You can be, a lion can be taken down by jackals, or hyenas, I guess is the, the low level predator, in the plains. But, and we always have to remember that, however, he could have run, but I'm sure if he was going to save somebody, he would have said, well, sorry, you're getting beaten up, but I'm not going to get involved with that. I could see that would be an ethical dilemma for an ethical person who says, I don't want to see an innocent person getting beaten up. And MMA training will not train you to spot what a situation of a bunch of frenzied people can be, or how quickly a crowd that is just looks like they're just watching a fight can suddenly participate in one. Every realm of training has their holes, and real world evaluation of violent situations is not something sport fighters are trained in. They just aren't. And the same way with the dojo type theoretical martial arts will often be oblivious to that level of violence. And that's where I give a great deal of respect to security people, even people that hang out in bars a lot, get into bar fights. They know, they can see when a bar fight is starting to brew. They can see when people are when an individual looks like they're starting to get aggressive or antsy, leading up to that. There's body language that starts to convey those things. But sport fighting doesn't train that. And your average traditional martial art doesn't address much of that either. But it's one of those things, I think it's a basic survival skill to have.
I think to be in everyone's sort of defense, a lot of people don't appreciate just how vicious that pack mentality can be when it goes, and that ripple effect. And it's unbelievable just how what you think sort of normal, sane, rational people can do in that kind of environment with that pack sort of thing going on. It's unbelievable. So I don't blame anyone if they haven't sort of seen that, been around that. It's incredible to witness. But the other thing, and this is where I wanted to draw on this, because it was interesting when he was talking about this, and this isn't about any singular person, by the way. So this certainly isn't about the guy that we were talking about a minute ago.
Sure.
I have no idea about that, but it does bring up an interesting point, especially for people like ourselves and martial artists, when we talk about running away or engaging, what have you, and that is the ego. And you were speaking a minute ago about saying that he rushed in to go to somebody's aid, which is admirable, absolutely. But then it suddenly occurred to me, some of the motivation for us would be ego, because we would have to then talk to our friends and our family and our loved ones and our work colleagues, who all think we're these super duper superheroes that may not wear a cape, but we wear a gi, and we should be able to defend everybody from everything. That's what we do as martial artists. And so in that situation, ego would make it very difficult to just accept the fact of a single individual. But ego, I think, is something that we've all got to be careful of, because it does occasionally lead us astray, shall we say, and get us involved in things that we shouldn't necessarily be involved with. It's an interesting sort of element to what we're talking about, especially when it comes to martial artists, because it's one of those, we all talk about lack of ego and all the rest of it, but martial artists are mostly the most egotistical people I know.
That is certainly true. There are some monster egos in the martial arts, some of which are, I suppose, the arrogance is deserved from some of those people that are at the top of their game and they're really amazing. The ones it doesn't make it any more palatable when they're arrogant jackasses, but the ones I find that are the most puzzling are the ones that don't have much skill but have got a lot of ego. and a lot of arrogance anyway. So, but either way, not understanding your own capabilities and what you're walking into is a recipe for a disaster. And like I said, with that account, I'm certainly not blaming the man for jumping in. It was totally noble for him to do that. It's just nature is very harsh on poor decisions and ones that are made in haste or without a full understanding of a situation. And my guess, I didn't see any lead up or hear how the lead up happened, but it looked to me like this is something that happened in the span of seconds. And this is another thing, I'm sure with the man and his family that came out of the amusement park, he probably had only a few seconds to make a decision of, what do I do? This is obviously a bad situation. And this is one of those things where talking it through like we're doing now and encouraging people to think through how they would handle situations like this are good mental exercises, because it can help prepare you for what you should be watching for, how you should make your decisions, obviously remaining calm and not making decisions out of panic. You have to do that. If you make any decision out of fear entirely, it will probably be a bad decision. And that could be just run, take off and run. It could be attack, engage in attack. And oftentimes, when you get into that heated situation, the adrenaline starts to dump. Sometimes attack is what people will do. They have that personality of, I'm just going to go on the offensive. And that can be a big mistake. Maybe they didn't realize they were going after somebody who had two of his friends there, or his brothers or whatever, and get into a world of trouble. So I think this is such a complex thing. It's hard to even come up with a basic rules of engagement to say, here, just look for this, look for that. If you see this, then do this other thing. And it's so complex. Every situation is got so many different variables. But I think keeping a cool head is a recipe, the first step for everything. Try to keep your eyes on things going on, rather than letting things go on around you you're not paying any attention to, as our two main ingredients. And I know instructors talk about that situational awareness thing, but it's how it plays out is very interesting. And it takes practice.
Yeah, well, I would say that there are positive things that people can do, but it's making those habits, isn't it? And as you say, it takes practice. It's embedding those into your into your everyday sort of what you do and your your way of going about things. I mean, I remember, and the reason it's stuck in my head is because it's right at the extreme of what things are and how things are, but it very much highlights why people do what they do. So this guy, whenever he went to a new hotel, he would go up to his room, he would put on a blindfold and a gas mask, and he would try and find his way to the emergency exit. Right? And it was a documentary they made about these certain people with these strange behaviors. And he was one of the people on this documentary, and it was very bizarre, but it turned out that his job was an investigator for these kind of serious fires that happen in public spaces, such as hotels, conference centers, that kind of thing. And he basically said the vast majority, by far, don't die from burning to death. They die from smoking inhalation because they can't find their way out. Mm-hmm. And so because he's got a very specific view on the world, i.e. that's what he does on a daily basis and sees the very worst of it, he wants to be prepared for that. Mm-hmm. Now, what I tend to find with people that are in security or any kind of sort of confrontational roles is that they embed into themselves an exit plan, if you like. So whenever they go into a room or whenever they go into somewhere new, they figure out how to get out of it, where to go, where's the exits, where's the best place to, where would I, if it went pear-shaped, where would I go, what would I do? And they run that through in their head, and it's all just bubbling away in the background without really thinking about it. And that's something that I think is a real good habit for people to get into, especially if they're going to be going somewhere where there's a possibility, as you mentioned earlier, we said about the wedding, but if it was, say, a sporting event or with alcohol, you just can't trust people when they're full of alcohol. Um, in those situations, to prepare yourself and have a little mental map, if you will, that you go in and you say, okay, well, if it did get unpleasant for whatever reason, I could do A, B, or C. Then that way, again, you're not stuck in a panic mode. You've actually got some thought processes behind your action that you take. So I mean, for me, that's one of the key things that I would say to people is, regardless, if you're going to the cash point to take out a large sum of money, just consider for a moment somebody trying to stop you in that process, or coming up and talking to you. What would you do? How would you react? Just consider it, the same as if you're waiting late at night for a taxi alone, consider what your options might be if something terrible happened. And that way then you've at least given it a little bit of thought, and it's not that panic. So I mean, there's one suggestion that I could that I tend to tell people, and it's sort of served me okay pretty much, and people
Yeah.
that I know.
Yeah, appreciating where you are. I mean, even last week, I read an account from it was actually a self-defense instructor who was coming out of a self-defense class. He drove home, and if I recall the story correctly, he went to a parking ramp, and he said, I was, using my awareness and looking around. There was nobody in the parking ramp. He parked his car, got out, got his bag of punching, of boxing gloves and all the gear that he had. He went to walk out, and he suddenly saw this person approaching him in the parking ramp. And he said, where I was located, there was no way out. I would have to walk by this person. He said, it made me nervous because I saw the right hand was hidden and I couldn't see if there was something in the right hand. And I tried to kind of clear distance, and suddenly I saw it was a knife, and this person attacked him. And there were pictures with this story of, his leg had a big gash in it. He had a couple of other, had a couple of cuts and I think a stab in it. He survived, thankfully, but he said, we always talk about self-awareness, or, aware of a situation. And I was watching, I wasn't oblivious. I wasn't talking on my cell phone or anything like that. Even with the best things you can do, you can still be caught in a situation where running isn't an option. You were aware, but they've got the position on you, and, you might have to deal with physical violence. And, I didn't see how, I think he said it was my training. I feel like I survived because of it. It probably would have gone worse had he not been trained, and I would believe that. And like you said, nobody's impervious. Somebody comes at you with a kitchen knife, that's a serious, heavy duty threat. And I'm not certainly going to second guess him of how he did, with it. I don't expect even martial artists to be, impervious to a knife attacker. In fact, I definitely teach, if somebody attacks you with a knife, that's serious. They don't need a lot of skill to do a lot of damage, and that weapon can make up for a great deal of skill deficiency in an attacker. And it can happen that way. But to take on just run away or just use your awareness all the time and you'll avoid everything, like, that awareness can fail. And even like with the amusement park aspect, maybe that the guy could have gotten into a dialogue there and established a boundary and somehow verbally negotiated his way out with maybe using humorness or cleverness or some kind of banter, or who knows what could have happened. We'll never know, and we can't impose that. It could have been something he might have tried. I don't know if he was so nervous or terrified that it didn't happen that way. But the guy in the parking ramp with a knife, probably not a lot of banter or boundary setting is going to work in a situation like that. But we'll never know, But that to me is why the physical training is there, because when the awareness, your best efforts at awareness did not work, your negotiating skills or your verbal skills did not work, when somebody has eyed you up as a target and is not going to shift off of you, if that didn't work, or even trying to walk away didn't work, now what are you stuck with? To me, that's where those physical skills come into play, because despite all your best efforts, you may get failures at each of those points where you could have avoided physical violence, but you couldn't. Like that choice wasn't your choice to make. You tried to choose a nonviolent exit, but it was just not available to you.
Yeah, again, it's one of those, isn't it, where, I mean, the situation you just described, Carl, I believe that was, and again, it's one of those where I'm absolutely sure he did the best that he could with the situation, and you know, it sounds to me from the way that he described it, because I saw the post myself, that, you know, he did have awareness. He was, you know, he was aware of what was going on, and all that sort of thing, and it just shows that we're all human, absolutely, and what, you know, there are some things you can avoid, there are some things you can't avoid. That's fundamentally it. But when we talk about the physical skills and having training and being capable, I use the term loosely, then it goes back to when I said earlier about the dog analogy. It's the same thing. It's the barking dog analogy, right? If I walk around a corner and I'm greeted with a chihuahua going, I'm pretty sure that I can just literally kick the thing if I really need to and just carry on with my day. There's no real danger towards me, because snarling and gnashing its teeth, my response is going to be somewhat different based on my ability to physically deal with the situation. And again, when we're talking about the whole running away conversation, again, that has to be part of it, because you know, how do we feel with regards to capability? You know, how do we feel with regards to being able to physically dominate if we have to, if we have no choice? Because again, you know, if I slap that Rottweiler around the side of the head, I'm probably just going to antagonize him and make him worse. That's the truth of it. And so again, these are all factors in the decision-making process, isn't it? I mean, it comes back to the same thing all the time. It needs to be a decision, not a panic.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier that there are predators in the world, and the one thing that's important to know about predators is we can't think that they're accidental or they're haphazard or they're stupid. Oftentimes predators will pick a place where it will be difficult for you to make an exit. They want to corner you. And I don't know how in the UK over there, but here in the US, public bathrooms are one of the worst places in terms of safety, because oftentimes there is only one entrance and exit. So if somebody comes in after you into a public restroom, and even one of the large rooms that has stalls and whatnot in them, you're cornered in there. You can't get out unless you get past them, and they know it. Like I've known a number of people that have been held up by knife point in a public bathroom, because they suddenly paint a picture of you're cornered. You know, you're now facing somebody with a knife. Think about this. How do you want this to go? Do you want to give me your wallet or something else? How do you want this to go, sideways or whichever? So they kind of paint you into a corner where you know you don't have options, and to create fear. It's a method of intimidation. Same thing with things like stairwells and parking ramps. They know where dark corners are. They know where the places are that are easy to corner somebody in, because it works in their favor. It's like an intimidation. And so we have to account for, you know, as Sun Tzu would say, know your enemy. Know that these predators, if they want something and they're even a little bit smart about it, will figure out to put you into a place or catch you in a place where it's not easy to get away.
Yeah. But
they want to close off your options.
Yeah. But equally as important with that is not just the physical aspect of being put down a cul-de-sac, if you like, but there's also the mental aspect of that. When you look at things like the OODA loop and that kind of thing, these guys are already aware of what's going to happen. They've already set themselves on a course of action, so they're mentally prepared for what's coming. For us, it's that huge adrenaline dump. It's that massive overload. It's that overwhelm. It's you know, we're in that moment and we've got to play catch up. And again, that's a really important element of this, which is why it goes back to thinking through sort of options and worst case scenarios and what would I do if. because maybe, just maybe, that way it gives your brain a chance to sort of catch up that little bit quicker.
Mhm. Yeah, and obviously you would want to avoid being surprised as much as possible, and you may have to think very quickly. You may only have 5 to 10 seconds perhaps to say, okay, what's my situation? Can I get out of here? No, I can't get out. I'm cornered by this person. Is there something I can say to kind of buy myself some time, or buy a better position than I'm in right now? I mean, all these things can happen at pretty much lightning speed, but it's a dialogue that has to go on to keep strategy to get you out of that situation. If you just go to, oh my God, I'm cornered, and now you go into panic, you'll either freeze or completely submit. And I don't think those really simple decisions are the best way out. I've found that, keeping the cool head and trying to at least get a better position, and you do your best to try to avoid violence, but also try to read that person. If you know somebody like that, you see them walk into a bathroom after you and they pull a knife out, you can pretty much bet they were planning on doing this, and they've got the jump on you, so to speak. And that then you have to play catch up to try to turn things around, and you can try just handing over your wallet. It's not an unheard of tactic to say, it's my life is worth more than what's in my wallet. Here's the money, and they might leave. So you couldn't even pick on that as being a poor tactic. However, if they can get your money pretty easily, maybe they're interested in going farther than that. So that you can't just say that alone will solve your problem. And I guess this kind of comes to basically these broad strategies generally. Well, just run away, or just give them your wallet, or what have you. What if they're there to cause physical harm? Then are you willing to just accept that? It's kind of one of those soul-searching self-philosophy examinations of what you're willing to put up with and what you're willing to not. Where is your boundary? What are you willing to do to establish that boundary and reinforce it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, again, it's I think the oversimplification of the question is the actual polar opposite to what the actual answer is, which is there isn't a set answer. There isn't a specific one size fits all response. There's just way too many variables, and you can't possibly work out every eventuality and every possibility. It just can't be done, can it? So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, all I know is that as I go through life, my physicality changes, my mentality changes, what I want in the world changes, where I go changes, and all of those things impact on my decision-making processes. I'm less likely to run now than I would have been, say, 20 years ago, mainly because 20 years ago I'd stand a much better chance of outrunning somebody.
This is true. The knees don't get better as you get older.
Exactly, yeah. So there's that to it, and then there's also the elements of, well, how do I feel within myself with regards to capabilities, the legal aspects, and all the rest of it. I mean, if I can avoid, I will, absolutely 100%, right? Because
Agreed.
that's the sensible, smart thing to do, right? But when we say avoid, that could be don't go to that place, don't wear that stupid t-shirt, don't put that social media post. There's so many ways that you can actually avoid in the first instance, so it doesn't get to that, which are fundamentally, I think, the better option. As I get older, I spend less and less time in these kind of volatile situations. I don't work in the nightclubs and bars anymore. I haven't done for a while. I don't frequent them anymore. Again, 15, 20 years ago, literally every weekend, I would be in the bars and I would be in the clubs as a customer, not just to work, working there, but as a customer, and I would drink too much, I would party too much, I would hang out with strangers who I didn't really know, and get into all kinds of crazy scrapes and things, and so the thought processes were very different then. My physicality was very different then, and I had a different as we get older, the pendulum shifts.
It does, and I guess this has been a great discussion. Just to wrap this up, I would say the just run away or just walk away is similar to many of the shorthand answers for here's how you solve your violence problem. The minute you hear an all-in-one type strategy, you know that it's just inadequate. It will not cover you. There are no single solutions that will cover your own safety. They may be part of it, part of a larger set of tools, but they are just that. They're individual tools. This would be like any car mechanic saying, well, this one wrench is all I need to work on a car. Well, that's utterly ridiculous. Yes, you do need that one, but it's not the only one, and it can't be the only one, or you just won't have the ability to be very useful. Like you won't, if you won't have all the tools available that you might need depending on the situation that you have. And then of course, training is where we develop the tools, and then how we apply them is that wisdom of knowing which one you need for a particular situation. And I find as an instructor, that's the hardest one to convey, because it's hard to put on full simulations that have all the intent for students to read and to perceive. We do some scenario training, and I have seen some, but even from pros that have run it for professionals, it lacks that same intent that you would be reading real people and their real anger or their predatory behavior, and kind of simulate a little bit, but it's tricky. But I think that staying away from all-in-one solutions or simplified solutions is a good thing for people on the martial path, to how to understand their training and how it fits into the strategy of self-protection.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably just add on to the end that the thing is, if you only have a short amount of time to cover such a wide, vast, difficult topic, then if you could only really give one piece of advice to somebody just starting out, or somebody, then actually it is a valid piece of advice. If you can escape, if you can avoid, if you can run away, run away. But it's the word if at the beginning. There's the critical factor. If you can, then you should. But that's for me where the separation, not run away, but if you can.
Right. The devil's in the details, and it's in that word if.
Yeah, absolutely.
and being able to perceive it correctly, because a lot of times misperceptions make for poor decisions, and that happens too. So, well, this has been a great discussion, Matt. I was really looking forward to this topic, and it's one we hear so many times. I'm sure you've heard it in the self-defense world too, and every time I hear it, I kind of roll my eyes and be like, okay, yeah, run away if you can, but there's a lot more to it. So I appreciate you coming on and chatting about this.
Oh no, my pleasure, my friend. My pleasure. I always enjoy chatting with you, and it's a great topic, isn't it? There's so many different things that we could be talking about, and yeah, looking forward to the next time.
Absolutely. In the meantime, take care of yourself, and hope you and the family are doing well.
And you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.